Hi, I'm Celia Boothman, founder of LTR Coaching, and I'd like to welcome you to the Inspired Triathletes podcast, where I'll be bringing you stories from female triathletes and taking on topics that are important to women in the sport. Hi and welcome to today's episode. I'm here with Jo Stone, who is the founder of the Balance Institute, which helps women to chase big goals without burning out. And just to introduce yourself, so you must have had your own experience that led you to creating this space for women to help them. So would you like to share with us your story?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me, Celia. I'm Jo, and if you couldn't tell from the accent, I'm an Aussie. So living in Sydney, Australia, and I have two kids who are now, almost 15 and 11. And I found that when they were a lot younger, I climbed the ranks in corporate, as many high achievers do, climbed quite quickly. And my goal was to have a chief in my title. So I wanted to get on an executive team. I wanted to work for a global listed company, and I wanted to have an Asia Pacific role, which was sort of the tick, tick, tick. I wanted to have a place on a not-for-profit board. And I also wanted to build my own house. Sort of, it's a great Australian dream to build something. So I had all that at 32, and then
Wow.
went, okay, big job, long hours, two young kids at that point in time, and wondered why, despite having everything that I said I wanted, I still felt empty and quite miserable on the inside. I was permanently exhausted. I had pushed my body to all kinds of limits, and we can talk about, I guess, my triathlon journey in that. But essentially, I then started the process of blowing up my life, of going, okay, well, I'm not happy here. Maybe I should just sell it all and move to the country. Or maybe, maybe it's the job, maybe it's the husband, maybe it's the whatever else. And so I first upsold the house. That was the big domino to fall, and selling a forever house that you've built and you've chosen every doorknob and every paint color and planted every plant was a really big deal for me. And that was also the time that I decided to tap out of the race with the Joneses. So I went on that journey, blowing everything up, only to realize it was me. It wasn't anything that I had blown up. And so thus began my journey to really understand what I needed to do to redefine success, to redefine what balance meant to me. And through a series of all kinds of interesting accidents, found myself now being the life coach and sort of mentor to, I've had hundreds of women come through my programs, and we've been going for 5 years now.
Wow, that's so amazing. And there's that book called Wherever You Go, There You Are, isn't there?
Yeah, that was very much it.
Which sounds relevant.
Absolutely, completely. And I
Yeah.
thought I used to say, well, it's the job, and well, it's the house, because I had a big, beautiful house with a pool, but it came with a big mortgage. So I then felt trapped in my job because I had to make, and couldn't drop my income. My husband wasn't working at the time. And so, yeah, I just trapped on this hamster wheel, and really, really easy to blame everyone but myself.
Yeah, definitely. And all of those things that you wanted to achieve, and it's like you get there and it's like, oh, it didn't make any difference because you or it
I need to
did,
be
but it's
happy
like, yeah,
now.
yeah, amazing. And
Yeah.
so you triathlon was part of that journey as well, wasn't it? So would you like to share why you decided to do a triathlon as well as all of those things?
Yeah, all of those things. So I remember I'd always wanted to do triathlon. My viewpoint was I was a mediocre runner, a mediocre swimmer, and a mediocre rider. So if I was average at three things, would that make me good at something? So I actually sat on the hospital bed after having a C-section for my first, and went, I feel like a cow. I was sort of running up until about 4 or 5 months in my pregnancy and doing lots of pump classes and things like that. But being active has always been a really big part of who I was. I was doing half marathons, and I thought, right, I need something a bit different. I don't think I can run 21 Ks straight out the gate. So I thought, right, this is my chance. I'm on maternity leave for 9 months. I'll train in three disciplines because
Yeah,
having
and
a
you
baby
just
is
had
a
a
piece of
C-section as
cake.
well. Yeah.
Just had a C-section.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I started training, and I did my first one when she was 6 months old.
Wow.
So I then, that was my motivation. I like having goals. And so so I set myself some goals, and I did that basically for the 3 years in between my kids. So I would build myself up and joined a club, go to brick training every Saturday morning, put my bike, pass the baby to the husband, regardless of how much sleep I'd had, and put the bike on the rack on the top and burn those legs every time you got off the bike and started running, until somehow I started looking out for and almost enjoying that kind of horrible feeling of having lead in your legs. and
Mm.
and yeah, just met a bunch of people and started competing for the club. And yeah, and then basically did my last one just before I knew that we were planning to fall pregnant again. So I signed up for my biggest one. Wasn't quite Olympic distance. It was a club championships, just by nature of the course. That was all they had. And but pretty close. And so yeah, so did that, and then I ended up getting pregnant a couple of months later.
Okay. And did you go back to it after, or was that it? That was
I
your.
didn't end up going back to it after, just
Oh,
because of sort of some birth injuries and things like that. It took
okay.
me a while to start to run again. So I had to do a little more Pilates and things like that. I
Mm.
couldn't really go back to high impact. And yeah, but then ended up going back to running.
Okay.
So went back and did a few half marathons and stopped running for a while. Now I'm back to doing some 10Ks. So I did two
Oh,
10K races last year, and I'm training for another one in a couple of months.
oh, that sounds good. Yeah. And it's like finding where, what works for you as far as training goes and what exercise you want to do. Because for me,
Yeah.
I had a lot more time than you did by the sound of it. I wasn't doing all of these other jobs when I was into triathlon, so it was
Yeah.
that was what my I was focusing on really was doing that. So I guess that was my outlet
Mm.
instead of my career or whatever. It was that
Yeah.
outlet
Well, also
instead.
after when I had my second, part of the reason I didn't go back to doing tries is I took on a bigger job. So that's when I
Mm,
took on my chief role. I had staff in 5
okay.
countries. I was traveling every 3 weeks. And then because at that point I had a 1-year-old and a 4-year-old,
Yeah.
when I took on this job, it was really tricky to then, having, I don't know, been in New Zealand for 4 days that week and my husband single parenting, to then go, see ya, I'm going to go
Yeah.
for a 4K run to the pool, and then I'm going to go run this, and then I'm going to come back. I mean, I would still, jog and things in hotel treadmills. But again, because I had the kids, I'm sure many women can relate to this. I would always try to maximize my time at home. And then I'd be on the
Mm,
6 a.m. flight because the kids were still asleep. And so I'd try to squeeze out everything, and then I'd try to get home late so that I could be there first thing in the morning and help. So it was very
mm,
much this. There was just, when you're in that prime kid early, and my daughter had a lot of, we had a lot of health troubles. My husband had a lot of health troubles. So he's in and out of hospital, and
mm.
all of that was really tricky. And so I would have loved to get back to it. But even I recognize that I think I've
That's
bitten off
enough.
enough.
Yeah. So when you were doing that and you were kind of coming back to your kids and trying to squeeze things in, how did you feel did you feel like you were able to be present there, or was it always thinking, oh, what have I got to do next, or how am I going to manage everything?
Yeah, well, I very much then was afflicted with a lot of the challenges that the women come to me for now. And I'm
Mm,
lucky now that I have a very different toolkit. And even though my kids are older, part of my journey of, as I sort of burnt out and blew everything up, was saying I'm never actually present. I'm there. I'm there
mm,
for breakfast and I'm there for dinner, but I'm thinking about my next meeting, or I'm thinking about that we need to buy more bananas, or the kids
mm.
need to eat more vegetables, or I need
Yeah.
to book into the vet, or the million and one tabs that are running through our brain. So I was not as present as I would have liked to have been, but I definitely rectified that sort of not too long after that process, because my little one was, when did that happen? Sort of 4 or 5 when we started the
Okay.
blowing up process. So I managed to catch her pretty early. And now, I've learned so much more about what it takes to be present. And we're almost programmed, to think that we have to be switched on. My worth was very, very much tied to being a doing person. I call
Mm,
myself a GSD, a get stuff done person. give it to me, I'll get it done. I carried most of the mental load. I was doing all the work. I could very easily slip into martyr mode. Just leave it with
Yeah.
me. I'll call the doctor. I'll do these things. And yeah, I had to learn to put a lot of that down because it wasn't actually serving me.
Yeah, definitely. We're very easily led down that path, aren't we? Of the
Mm.
kind of, yeah, I can do it all, I'm capable, and we've been
Yeah.
encouraged to as well, haven't we? As
Mm.
as women, oh, we're the ones that organize everything and we're the ones that can do it
Mm.
all, and then it becomes something that's not very helpful for us. And it's,
No, no.
it's great, but we also have to learn to share. I was talking to someone the other day about this, and it was like we have to be able to ask for help and learn to
Mm.
share that load, even if it might not be done exactly the way you want it to be done, but it's like that's okay. You have to be able to let that go a little bit, don't you? To to
Absolutely. I was a very strong perfectionist for a long time and quite proud
mm,
of it. I used to think it was one of my big assets. I was in marketing. And so, I would be watching a presentation, and if there was an errant A in the wrong font, I would see it across the room. I'd be like, that
mm,
A is in a different font.
yeah.
Those boxes aren't left aligned. It would just really, I couldn't watch the presentation if it was all out of whack. I'm like, that paragraph isn't centered. So I
Yeah.
could see all of that. Um, but after a while, I realized that, that was causing me so much pain. And it's probably one of the biggest traits that women who come to me suffer with. I call it the triple P trifecta of self-sabotage. And
Okay.
so many women are afflicted by this perfectionism.
Mm,
And when you're a perfectionist, you always procrastinate, because
yeah.
what better way to avoid making a mistake than never beginning? And
Mm,
they're also people pleasers,
yeah.
and in some way or another. Now, I didn't necessarily align with the term people pleaser. However,
Mm,
I really struggled to hold boundaries. I couldn't put my phone down. If someone wanted something from me, I'd say, sure, I'd do it, put everybody else before me. I used to worry a lot about letting people down. I was
yeah.
also, on the committee of the daycare, and then I became the school parents, and like we call it the P&C here, like the parent committee in the school.
Yeah.
Of course, I was the president of that for 3 years. I tried to just come in on the committee, and then the next year I'm vice president, and then before you know it, now I'm the president, right through COVID,
Yeah.
which was hell to be,
Oh my God.
advocating for parents in that time. So there's just something about sort of that high achiever DNA that we always end up being the ones doing the things, stepping up, taking the things, because it can be easier for us than other
Mm,
people, but that doesn't mean that we always have to do it. So I had to go
yeah.
on a journey to learn to say no, and to learn to put myself first, because I would, I always did. When you say self-care, I don't really like that word. I would take myself to the
Mm,
physio if my, ITB was sore, or so I didn't neglect my body in that way, because I knew I had to run in 2 days. And so if I wanted that not to hurt, but I never really knew how to slow down. I
mm,
had one pace, and that's fast. I did
yeah.
everything fast. I did everything in a rush. I always had so much to do, and learning to slow down and to stop and to allow myself to rest, not just my body to rest because I need a magnesium bath and I'm going to sit in there and pay some bills while I'm in the bath, to actually stop.
Yeah.
um, really was a skill I had to learn.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. It's sorry, I don't know if you can hear my thing beeping. It's really irritating.
No, I
I
can't hear
think
anything.
I've got a message that keeps beeping back, and I don't know whether it's on the computer or on my phone, but
Oh,
luckily I'm glad
no,
you can't hear it because I can. It's like, stop
can't hear
it.
it.
Yeah, no, I recognize that definitely. I think luckily for me, I was able to pull myself out of it, but I kind of could realize, oh, I'm being a perfectionist and sort of see it before it became over all encompassing kind of thing.
Mm,
But I definitely, I can go that way, but I know where it is, but so many people don't, and they find it really
mm,
hard to it's interesting you talk about language there, like what you don't like the term self-care. And I think that is also another thing that impacts on it's almost like I've got an aversion to that because I don't think it's valuable or I've got,
mm,
that the way we describe things to ourselves. is
Mm,
so powerful. And if you can
mm.
frame it in a different way, I'm guessing you had to frame self-care as something else to be able to make the changes. I don't know.
Yeah, I had to really, it's a skill I call reframing. So I use that word frame
Okay.
in terms of, because to me, a lot of the self-care was, I call it pink wash self-care. Have a
Okay.
bubble bath, go for a
Yeah.
massage. It should
I
be
know.
wrapped in a pink ribbon with like sprinkled roses on it or something. Whereas
Yeah.
to me, that was a bit of a waste. And until I learned to deal with things like guilt, I'd go have a massage and I'd
Mm,
be lying on the table feeling guilty for having it or not being able to switch off while I was there anyway. And then I would come
mm,
out and beat myself up for the fact that I just indulged in something that I hadn't earned. So I
mm,
really had to understand more of the neuroscience and the mechanics behind most of us women. And this was definitely me. I felt like I had to earn my rest and I had to
okay.
earn the right to self care. Because when
Mm,
you're as stretched as so many women are between work and the kids and hobbies and fitness and your body and your health and all of those things, you usually feel like you're not doing anything well. You feel like you're
mm,
failing at everything. And so therefore the default pattern is to double down and work harder. Let me
yeah.
try harder, let me push harder, let me do more, let me prove myself more. And so, in that energy, you then now need to earn your self care. And you can't possibly have this thing, you can't possibly slow down because you're failing at everything. You're not doing anything well. So, you don't
Mm,
deserve to rest. You don't deserve to go to bed early or to take care of your body beyond something that's broken. You can't just do it if there's no reason. You can't just take a nap in the middle of the day
mm,
because you haven't earned it. So I
mm,
had to really reframe that I don't need to earn my rest. I I'm able to meet my needs, whether they're my body's needs, not just my ITB or my calf because it's tight and therefore I can't go to training on the weekend, just because I need the rest. Actually listening to my body was something that, yeah, I had to go on this journey of almost detangling needing
mm,
to earn anything. So really that's, conditions that we put on ourselves around how we have to be, how we have to operate. And so when I put those conditions down, then it became easier to say, I don't have to prove anything to anyone. And the big reframing for me was that if I if I'm running on fumes and I'm exhausted, I'm going to be grumpy. I'm going to
mm,
be irritable. I'm going to snap at the kids. I'm not going to be able to think straight. I'm going to overthink things. There's all these bad things that happen. But
mm,
if I rest, if I've got energy, if I can be playful, well, then everyone's going to get the best of me. So isn't
mm,
it my duty as a mum, as a wife, as a daughter, as all of these things, if I don't take care of myself, well, then no one gets the best of me. And that's
mm,
actually not the right way for me to live. Everyone deserves to have the best of me, not a shell.
mm. Yeah, I see that a lot with the earning things. It's like someone will miss a workout and then they'll feel like everything's wrong. It's all
Hmm.
gone wrong. And it's like I'll look at what's happened on there because I can see what training people have done, and I'm like, it's not that bad. But it kind of goes into this spiral of like, oh, I missed this and then I missed that and then this
Hmm.
happened and that happened. And so there's all this guilt and kind of
Hmm.
upset. And then what people will often do is they'll try and catch up and they'll try and like, which doesn't always, sometimes you try and fit things in a bit better, but often it's not the best thing to do. It's just like leave that, move on to the
Yeah,
move on to the next bit.
yeah.
And maybe
Well,
your
that's a
body was
skill.
just going, hang on, I've had enough for a bit. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's a skill that I was certainly never taught. And that's, the art of letting go. That's
Yeah.
the art of self-compassion and self-forgiveness, like you said, and going, well, I'm tired or I had a big day, or not this, you're lazy, you're soft, you didn't work hard enough. It's
Mm,
actually, I'm listening to my body. And I found that since I'm listening to my body more, I'm listening to my intuition a lot more, it's completely changing how my body is reacting, how it's recovering. when
Yeah.
I'm putting more effort into that recovery, into my nutrition, into, the various things I do to help my body, it's just so much better. It's so much
Mm,
better. I find it really interesting. We talk about rest. I had one of my first 10K runs in May of last year. I was doing a lot of things around it. So I was playing soccer, I was playing netball, and running 3 times a week and working and have the kids and all the things and walking the dog in all of that. And towards the end of the training regime, my body just broke down. And
mm,
so I decided then, and I got quite sick over our winter in the lead up to my next race. I didn't do anywhere near as much training. I took probably 3 to 4 weeks off because got sick with the flu.
mm,
Didn't end up doing my long runs were nowhere near what they should have been. My training volume was way down, but I went into the race well rested, and I thought there's no way I'm going to get even close to the time that I want.
mm.
I was only a minute slower in a 10K race. Having
Mm,
not, I mean, I obviously had base, but by
yeah.
resting, I didn't actually lose that much. The old me would have pushed and done it, but I went, oh, well, this is a new way I'm operating. Let's see what
Yeah.
happens. A minute in 10Ks
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
only difference. It was just amazing.
Yeah. No, it's amazing what kind of fitness you retain when
Mm,
you've been doing training a long time. Um, I stopped like competing about well, it's about 3 years ago now. So my training, I had almost like you with the sort of dropping down. I was like, right, I'm done with this for a bit. I might go back to it maybe, but who knows? At this moment in time, I want to focus on something else. So I stopped triathlon training, and my fitness still like pretty high. I can kind it's like it's there. It's you can tap into it. I'm not saying like don't do, you can't do anything, but if you keep up some maintenance and
mm.
you can still kind of do quite well. I'd be interested to see what would happen if I went out and did a race. I don't think I'd be like that unfit really compared to what I
No,
was, but
no,
I
and
was
it's pretty rare that people who do triathlon go from that to just sitting on the
doing
couch
nothing.
and not
Yeah,
moving for the
yeah,
next three
yeah.
years. They're usually sporty. It's not
Doing
the type of,
something. Yeah.
they're normally the type of people that haven't just gone from couch potato to, never exercised in their entire lives and they go, I'm going to do triathlon. Like, that's
Yeah.
not your starter sport.
Not really. Although there are
No, there's
some
no
people
couch
that
to
do
first
it.
try.
Honestly, there are you do get that sometimes people do that and then they do like we where I live we've got Ironman Wales. It's like a big
Um,
event in the like near town and it goes past the house practically.
mm,
And lots of people see it and they're like, I'm going to do that. People that can't swim, they've never done anything, and they'll do it. And I'm like, I think that's amazing just to sort of go from practically nothing to doing an Ironman. But then quite often it's too much. And then they're like, well, I'm
mm.
not doing that again. It's like going from one extreme to another. And then
Yeah.
it's like, no, I can't do anything anymore. So I think it's about that finding what works for you, and
Mm.
you've obviously got that formula. So how do you help women who are in that stage of, what are the signs of actually I've taken on too much, I feel like I'm burning out.
Yeah, everyone's signs are unique, but there's some common threads between them. So typically, burnout is just that feeling of constant exhaustion and never getting ahead. And the way I like to talk about, the burnout that we typically see in the clients that come to us, I call it a high functioning burnout. So burnout's a spectrum, and everyone thinks burnout is the person who's ended up in hospital or whose body has collapsed and they can't get out of bed. Like, well, I'm not that bad. I can
Mm,
keep going. But this high functioning burnout is almost persistent states of exhaustion and the absence of joy. So everything feels harder and harder. You can't remember the last time you laughed. You're exhausted. You can't control your emotions anymore. Someone says, how are you? And you say, fine. And you turn into a puddle because you can't possibly keep it all together. So there's this quite a really an endemic, challenge with so many women who are teetering on this life where they feel like if they want to have a career or be an athlete and be a mum or whatever it is that they're trying to juggle, that comes with exhaustion and it comes with a sense of emptiness and unfulfillment. So this is why so many women don't even know that they've actually been feeling burnt out for, years,
Mm.
sometimes decades, depending on, when they've added children into their equation. And it's really deciding that it doesn't have to be that way, that you don't have to be exhausted. Doesn't mean that you have to blow up your life. Kids don't tend to go back. They're a bit of a one-way ticket,
Mm.
you know. So
Yeah.
you don't have to give up your life. Everyone always thinks that, well, this is the only choice that I have, but it's
Mm.
not. So knowing that you may be in high functioning burnout, some of those signs, like I mentioned, inability to control your emotions, persistent exhaustion, inability to set boundaries, constantly thinking about other people, inability to take care of yourself, always putting yourself last. These are just some of the symptoms that we typically see.
Mm. And then how do you start with someone? I mean, obviously they've come to you because they want to make a change. They've recognized that and they want to make that change. They've seen that in themselves. Where do you start with people? Or does it vary?
Well,
I'm
the first
guessing it
step,
varies.
yeah, yeah. Well, the first step is always self awareness.
Mm.
So we spend a lot of our lives on autopilot. We are
Yeah.
incredibly habitual creatures. Usually about 95% of what we do is by habit. So we have to start the process of actually helping you see how you've been operating, starting
Yeah.
to see the patterns. And the way I tend to help people build that is through neuroscience. I'm not someone who likes being told, do this. My first answer is always, why?
Yeah.
Why should I do that? Why? And so when you go in, I do a lot of work with women on understanding their brain, how their brain works, how it's wired, why you do things the way that you do. And then you're able to take almost this sort of scientific or curiosity lens to, oh, okay. Wow, I do that. That's interesting. Instead of taking a stick to ourselves and going, oh, that's so silly. Why do I do that? Oh my gosh,
Mm.
I'm feeling guilty again. Um, One of the first things that I like to do with women is we do a few audits, and it's a horrible term,
Mm.
but we get to audit their time, see where it's really going. We usually find between 5 and 10 hours a week very, very quickly because there's huge amounts of procrastination, of overthinking, of overwhelm. But one of the other things I love doing is we do them an audit of their emotional home. And this becomes really interesting because we're such creatures of habit that we typically have become chemically addicted to around 10 to 12 emotions that we tend to experience every day. And when you start to see, oh, okay, I mean, first of all, you need to understand what emotions are because I
Mm.
couldn't really label them apart from guilt, frustration, resentment, pissed off, really, really angry, grumpy, irritable. I had
Yeah.
quite a good vocabulary for all the annoyed ones.
Yeah.
And then I had, joy and happy, but I couldn't really name anything else. So we have to really uplift people's emotional vocabulary and
Mm.
help them see where their emotional home is, see what they've become chemically addicted to. And for many women, mine was guilt. I was always felt
Mm.
guilty, no matter where I was. If I was running, I felt guilty because I probably should be swimming that day. And if I'd gone at 6, well, maybe I should have gone at 5:30. That was just a perpetual state that I lived in, which really robbed me of the ability to be present anywhere. And I still remember
Mm.
the day I realized how strong my chemical addiction was to guilt when I'd been doing so much work on myself and I'd been understanding my emotions and learning to let them go. And I woke up one day and went, oh, I don't feel guilty. And then I went, oh, I
Should
feel
feel
guilty
guilty for
because I
it.
don't feel because I'm not guilty. Shouldn't I be guilty? I've done something wrong, surely. And I
Oh
went,
no.
wow, I'm feeling guilty for
That's
not being
crazy.
guilty. That just
Yeah.
shows you how strong that emotional home has become. And no matter what I'm feeling, it's trying to drag me back to what I've become chemically addicted to, what my body knows. It's sort of created this homeostasis of guilt is part of that, and we don't like to change it. It's part of your thermostat.
Mm.
So
Mm.
that's some really fun work that we get to do is to shift those emotions. And then, after our people tend to work with us for 12 weeks, and after that time, they get to rewrite their emotional home and see just how much you can shift really quickly when you know
Mm.
how to do it.
Yeah, it must be quite hard though to like I'm sensing some kind of like aversion to the positive words as well, and people might have that kind of like, oh, but that's not for me, or that's, how do you get people to actually embrace feeling the positive stuff? Is it through looking at, okay, I don't want to feel like this because they've got such a negative bias? It feels like a lot of people have got like a really strong negative bias maybe that come to you. So you kind of almost have to flip. I don't know if I'm making any sense, but flip things
Yeah.
on their head so that they go,
Yeah.
okay, yeah, I don't want to feel that. So
Mm.
yeah,
Yeah, well,
I
in the
don't even know what
brain,
I'm asking, but
no, I get what you're asking. We do, our brain does have a negativity bias because it's trying to keep us alive. And so
mm,
we typically remember more negative emotions than positive ones. But for most women, it's not that they don't want to be happy or they don't want to be calm or they don't want to feel peace. They just don't know how to do it. Their nervous
mm,
system almost isn't capable of feeling those emotions because there's always guilt that comes in, or there's also always shame that comes in. So it's really learning to detangle all of their emotions from each other because they tend to,
yeah,
I call these compounding emotions. So we tend to, something happens and we get angry, and then we feel guilty that we're angry. And
mm,
then we feel sad that we're guilty, that we're angry. And then we get
yeah,
angry that we're sad, that we're guilty, that we're angry. And then we yell at a kid. And so we're terrible at compounding, but it's a skill that we unfortunately naturally tend to inherit from our
mm,
parents. But when you can start to understand really the science behind emotions and how we can start to program more positive ones in, you also get to pick the ones that feel right for you because not everyone
yeah.
wants to be happy.
No,
And
I know. Yeah,
it's more
it's
about
very
maybe
sad.
people want confidence or calm or contentment or groundedness, or there's even curiosity or creativity, these emotions that are more neutral as opposed to
Mm,
I'm bouncing off the walls excited. But as you
yeah.
said, it's usually then we've got perceptions about, well, if you're somebody who's bouncing off the walls excited or who's skipping with happiness, what does that say about you?
Mm,
So if you judge people who act that way, or maybe in your childhood, which all this stuff comes from, maybe it wasn't safe to be happy because then,
mm,
you made too much noise and you cheesed off a
yeah.
parent who was sleeping. So there's usually some really interesting work that we get to do there around, well, every human has the ability to feel happy. Why
Yeah.
can't you feel happy?
Yeah, definitely. I understand. Yeah, I can get that because that's what I was trying to get at was kind of like, yeah, it's okay to be like that, and that judgment that we have because of feeling like we can't have it almost. It's like, well,
Mm,
they can't have it either because I can't. And was something that I quite often come back to is if you're judging other people, then really you're judging yourself as well, and you get in that
mm,
loop and you can't get out of it. So it's trying not to
mm,
be feeling like that. Is you can't sort of stop your feelings, but reckon, like you say, we go back to that self-awareness again, which you
mm,
start with in the first place, and that never,
mm.
you can't just get rid of that, can you? I'm guessing you then revisit, you have to go round again and go, okay, I'm feeling this, something else will pop into. You can't get rid
Yeah,
of
I
all
call
of
them
it.
like layers of an onion, you're always
Mm,
tearing off the next layer. But what I love about this work is you get faster at it. So you start to
mm,
see the patterns. And, as you said, judgment is judgment that you have of yourself. But things like jealousy, if you're jealous of
mm,
someone, well, that's just a secret desire that you have.
yeah.
So if you realize, oh, I'm jealous of someone's car, oh, well, maybe it's because I would like a nice car, or I'm jealous of, the hug that they just gave their kid. Oh, okay, maybe I have a desire to have that. So instead of being things that beat you up and are horrible, all of these things, emotions, thoughts are just almost like stickers to say, look here. So
Yeah.
you stop beating yourself up and it stops being so hard. I mean, when people start this work, it can feel really hard because they beat themselves up and there's so much shame and why have I been thinking that way? And there's grief about, the things they've missed or so there's so much stuff. But after a while, I tend to just gamify it.
Mm,
Something happens and I go, okay, there's a story here, there's a lesson here. What's the
yeah.
lesson? As we're going through it, this really hurts, but there's a lesson here. Just wait and find the lesson. There is gold. Wait for it. And then, it might be a year later, you go, oh, that was the gold. I couldn't see it at the time, but now I can see it. So
Yeah.
it's some of this just comes down to experience. It's like anything, when you first get off the bike at brick training and you start running. I remember I literally walked 2 steps and collapsed and went, "Oh my God, who put lead in my legs? There's no way I can possibly do this." But again, it's like anything. You build the muscle, you do the reps, you get the muscle memory, and your brain starts getting into these patterns a lot
Yeah.
faster.
Yeah, definitely. I found that from practicing. It was like the other day I got really upset and I was like, oh, I'm like that again. And then I started the whole guilt. Oh, I feel guilty
Mm,
for being upset. Then, and I just went on a really long walk and I was like, well, maybe this is my way of coping. It's okay to do that because I've always felt it was really bad. Oh, I'm going
mm,
off on my own. I don't want to speak to anyone. And that's just how I cope. That's how I deal with
mm,
things. And it's not a bad thing. When I realized that, I was like, actually, someone said to me, well, that's really good. You sort of like took yourself off and did what you had to do. I was like, oh yeah, I'd never thought of it that way. I just thought I was being like really weird and kind of off on this, yeah, just
mm,
walking for 4 hours, like I've got to get away from everyone. But yeah, everyone
mm,
has their own way of coping with things, and
mm.
one is not necessarily better than the other or worse than
Yeah.
another, and it's
Yeah, I
totally
find this
fine.
work, just like training can be better around others, this type of work is often better with other women because then you'll
Mm.
find out that, oh, somebody else lost it and had to go for a walk to cool off
Yeah.
too. And someone else go, I don't do that. I do this. And you go, oh, okay, that's interesting. So when you realize, I've just been amazed at over the years how similar our patterns all are. So we think we're
Mhm.
different, we think there's
Yeah.
something wrong with us, and yet the vast majority of us tend to, and everyone's upbringing is different, everyone's sort of origins of things are different, but the behaviors and the patterns that we can see on the surface are incredibly similar.
Wow. And that's women are having those main. Do you think it's mostly women that have those feelings of guilt and shame more than, well, I guess if you don't work with men, you might not know, but do you think it's specific to women?
I think women are programmed for more guilt.
Mm.
Particularly the moment you become a mother. I used to joke that,
Oh,
they put
yeah.
the newborn on your chest and then they bring like this big sack of guilt and chuck it on top of the newborn. It's like, you're a mother now, you're going to be guilted for everything. So a part of it's conditioning, part of it can be cultural. So I think, I mean, men do still feel guilty, but
Mm.
typically women have almost glorified guilt because,
Yeah.
it's particularly these days, we're almost expected to parent like we don't work and work like we're not
Mm.
a parent. So you can't win no matter
Yeah.
what you're doing. So that's really what guilt is. Guilt is saying that what you're doing now, you should be somewhere else. So
Yeah.
anytime you're feeling guilty, you're making yourself wrong. So guilt and shame always come together, which is why
Mhm.
it can be so heavy and it can be so paralyzing and it leads to all kinds of different coping mechanisms. But yes, women, and there's a particular type of woman, if you take that sort of high achiever, juggling lots of things, whether it's sport, children, career, aging parents, whatever it is,
Mm.
uh, we've been told that we have to be perfect and no one
Yeah.
is. And so therefore everyone feels guilty for not being good enough or perfect enough.
Mm. Yeah. And yeah, we don't really need to prove anything. I mean, how did you get to that point where you were like, I'm I'm okay. You had the breakdown, you moved, and then you must have done some work on yourself. And
Mm.
how does your life look now compared to what it did then?
Yeah, I mean, it looks very, very different from the outside, perhaps not, but on
Okay.
the inside, it's completely different. So for me, I guess the biggest shift is I've I often use the word alignment. So I've become much more in alignment. So I've always come across as a pretty confident person, but on the inside, there was a whole lot of, oh gosh, did I say the right thing? And then I'd overthink it and I'd come home. And so now I'm able to be on the inside as confident and I don't overthink things. I never lie in bed and think, oh, this thing happened today. Could I have done it better? I hardly ever think back on the past. I just
Okay.
say, that was done. I can't change it. Don't beat myself up for things. So a lot of that stuff has stopped.
Mm.
Definitely, again, on the inside, the noise. My head was so busy all the time. The list, the to-do list, the business, like you name it, just this constant noise. And I was also never silent. So, because
Mm.
I always had to be doing something. If I was driving the car, I had to have music on or a podcast on. If I was going for a walk, I had to have something in my ears. I always had to be achieving something. I had to be
Yeah.
useful. Whereas now my family drives them up the wall. They get in the car and the volumes turn right down.
Mm.
Mom, I've been in the car because I have silence. I
Yeah.
now find it really interesting to watch my thoughts and see what's coming up. Most days I walk in silence, I run in silence. So, really getting a lot more comfortable and spending more time with myself allows me now to close those loops really quickly, to let go of emotions when they're not serving
Mm.
me, and to have a different level of self-awareness that puts me a lot more in control of my life. That doesn't mean that I don't get angry, doesn't mean my husband
Mm.
and I don't fight over stuff, and I have two girls, a teen and a tween, and that's got its own challenges. So it
Yeah.
doesn't mean that life is perfect by any stretch. However, the way that I feel I'm showing up is so much more peaceful, so much more fulfillment, and I feel so much more in control of my life than I ever used to, even though I have no more or less control than I ever used to. That's all just
Mm.
an illusion, but I feel much more in control now.
Yeah. So you cleared space in your mind
Mm,
really to be able to think those thoughts and have that time for self-reflection and be able to just,
mm.
yeah, process stuff rather than filling it with things.
Yeah.
And
We
maybe that was the
usually,
avoiding as well, isn't it? It's like I don't really want to look at that, so I'll fill it up with
yeah,
other stuff so I don't have
exactly,
to.
right? And usually women think that, okay, I've got to do work on myself. I have to do more. I've got to learn
Mm.
more. I need more information. I need more. But the truth is they need less. They need
Mm.
less stuff in their brain. They need less emotions blocking them up. They need less stuff to do so that they can actually focus on what really matters. So it's really, it's not even doing more, it's what's stopping you doing the things you really want to do. So the
Mm.
work is less, not more, which is
Yeah.
really counterintuitive. It's not train more, it's recover more.
Yeah.
It's not learn more, it's learn to let go. And that's what most women need help with, because everyone can be more efficient. Like, we can push ourselves, we can train harder, we can do all of those things. So give it, you don't need anything done, give it to a busy mum because she'll smash
Mm.
it out in whatever time. But we need a lot of help doing less. We need a
Yeah.
lot of help saying no and holding boundaries and, cultivating our emotions and spending time with ourselves. That's really hard. We are
Mm.
not programmed to do that.
Yeah. So how would you help someone to create those boundaries? Like what advice would you give someone if they wanted to create more boundaries around their time so that they could work on
Mhm.
themselves a bit?
Yeah, I guess the first thing to know is that a boundary is for you. It's not for the other person. And
Mm.
typically when you start to put up boundaries, other people don't like it. And that's because when you put up a boundary, the person who benefited most from it, if you're not having a boundary, is going to be upset.
Mm.
So, building up that self-awareness, recognizing that a boundary is there to protect you, your time, your emotions, your physical body, your stuff, whatever it is. And when you start to understand some of that science, to go, okay, well, what do I need right now? I need to go to sleep, or I need to train, or I need to go to work, or no, I'm not doing that thing for you because I'm not your whatever.
Mm,
So I think I found in that journey to hold boundaries, it's really the journey of learning to say no,
mm,
and that's essentially overcoming our people pleaser who always wants to say yes. So by asking
yeah.
yourself, I found the best question is, what am I making it mean? So someone
Mm,
says, "Can you bake cupcakes for the party?" And you go, "Oh my God, like poke my eyes out." The default can be saying yes. You really want to say no. Okay, what can I do differently? How do I say no? And the best way to do that is to notice where you're resentful.
mm,
Because anytime there's resentment, there's a sign that you need to hold a boundary. So I
okay.
usually tell people to go and see where you're resentful in life, where you're doing things, you're making the cupcakes, but you don't really want to be. And so when you're doing that, when that's the energy that you're living by, that's a sign that you actually needed to say no to baking the cupcakes
Mm,
or no to helping that person because you don't really want to.
mm. Yeah, that must be difficult if you want to make people happy, definitely. I can see that.
Well, that's the challenge, right? We don't
Mm,
exist to make other people happy.
no, no, yeah, that's something that I said the other day to my husband, actually. I was like, I'm not and he knew that, but I had to say it out loud. It's like, I'm not responsible for your happiness. But I
Yeah.
felt like I was because, because I was upset. I was like, I feel like I'm affecting you because I'm upset. That's why I just went. I'm going.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah, but
worked.
that's what we
But
do.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's a key premise of a boundary is that you are not
Mm,
responsible for how someone else thinks, acts, and behaves.
no,
So it's not your job to make someone else feel happy. No one else can make you feel guilty
no.
or sad. But when we're too entangled with others and we don't know where we begin and another ends, well, then you can never hold a boundary because
Mm,
I don't know what's my feelings, what's your feelings. I'm worried about your feelings. And then if you're
yeah.
sad, then maybe I should be sad because then if I'm too happy, then, and so
Yeah,
we
yeah.
just, it's
Yeah,
exhausting.
it's crazy, isn't it?
It's exhausting.
I know
Yeah.
it is.
Most women are the emotional anchor of the household. And so if you're
Mm,
intertwined, we have this almost constant hypervigilant radar. Who's
yeah.
upset? We can see, a kid over there is upset because they said something to dad, and now we've got to placate dad, and we've got to. So all
Mm,
of these radars are going off. Sometimes we just have to put it down and go, you know
mm.
what? I'm knackered. I'm out. You guys sort
Yeah,
it out.
yeah, yeah. They're normally fine. I've got boys, so they kind of like not necessarily. I don't know. They just kind of go into themselves, and you don't really know what's going on a lot
Mm.
of the time. So yeah, it's easy. I think it's probably easier to leave them to it because I know they're guys together. It's like you can. If I had girls, it might be different because I'd feel more. I don't know. It must be different to have
Mm.
that connection with another girl or female. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's interesting. We've
Well,
all
my
got our
husband just walked home.
dynamics to.
I know. Well, my husband just walks out. He's like, "It's girl stuff. I don't know how to deal with this." He throws his hands up, literally, and walks out. He's like, "They're yours."
You're like, thanks.
I'm sure I would have done exactly the same thing if I had
Yeah,
boys. I would have
yeah.
gone, "I don't know this stuff. I'm out."
Yeah, I know that. Well, yeah, they just don't seem to talk very much. So it's kind of a bit easier, maybe. I don't know if it's easy or not because you want to know what's going on and they don't tell you. So, yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, if you could go back and tell yourself one thing and any advice for any sort of triathletes as well that are kind of trying to fit everything in and balance everything, what advice would you give them to make sure or to try and avoid burnout, or if they are at burnout, what do they do?
Mm.
That's two questions really, isn't it?
That's all
Sorry.
right. I would say, how do you make space? And the beauty of, if you're training for triathlon, you usually, well, depends on where you're swimming, but if you're swimming in a pool, you spend a lot of time looking at a black line.
Mm,
And so some of the training can become quite meditative in some ways. So how do you use that time to process, to check in with yourself? Because most athletes are really good at checking in with their body, like, oh, like calves, like right calves feeling a bit tight, right, let me ask the physio, or left shoulders kind of. So they're
Mm,
really good at checking in on their physicality because they know that if their, Achilles is sore and they don't do something about it, that spells trouble. What if you could check in on your emotions and what you really need as much as you're checking in on your glute or your tricep
mm,
or your whatever else? So, okay, yep, calf's a bit sore, quads tight. Huh, bit of guilt going on at the moment because of blah, blah, blah. So even if you could just add a bit of an emotional scan to your
mm,
physical scan that athletes are constantly doing, just add that to it. That's going to give you a lot more awareness as to what's going on. And no surprise, there is a very, very strong link between your emotions and your physicality. We tend
mm,
to carry emotions in different parts of the body. So when you have recurring injuries, yes, it can be mechanical, but sometimes those injuries can have more of an emotional source. So
yeah,
when you deal with the emotions, you'd be amazed at how many people come to me and recurring injuries and recurring pain that no one has been able to solve magically disappears.
wow, yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, we
That's what I love
hold a
doing.
lot. We do. We hold a lot in our bodies, don't we? A lot of pain and kind of like tension, all sorts of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, one of my biggest challenges, like many women, I carry a lot of guilt and shame, and we tend to carry that around our hips.
Mm,
So, hips, pelvis, digestive issues, issues with pelvis, which then kind of correlates into like ITBs, hip flexors,
yeah.
glutes, or all that area. And that's where so many women tend to have challenges, not just childbirth related, but sort of ongoing mechanical. I had hip flexor problems and pelvic problems, and when I started releasing a lot of the guilt that I was holding that's carried in my hips, everything got so much better. Sure, my hip flexors still get tight and I still have to stretch. I'm not suggesting
Mm,
that you're never going to be, mechanically sore again, but the root cause of those injuries went away.
mm, yeah. So you're doing as well as mental, it's physical as well when you do the mental stuff. So that's good for
Yeah, well,
athletes
everything's
to
mind, body,
know.
spirit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I know. I think quite often athletes tend to kind of we put everything in physical box and focus on that and don't always. But I always try and get people to learn through the race that they're doing, or because you do spend a long time thinking. If you're
Mm.
out on a bike for 3 hours or whatever, you've got a lot of thinking time, and so
Yeah.
yeah, just use it. And I think a lot of women do use their sport as their boundary in a way. It's like, I've got to do this
Mm.
for me. That was what I did. I was like, just become a new mother. It was like a really good way for me to create that
Mm.
space just for me. So it is
Mm.
really helpful in that, as long as it doesn't become this another thing to feel guilty about, or another thing to it's
Mm.
got to be, this is the time for me that I'm going to enjoy myself, otherwise it becomes
Mm.
something else which isn't helpful.
No, and if you're pushing yourself and grinding yourself and you feel like you have to, and then you beat yourself up because had to call your run short, or, you got a flat tire or whatever, if
Mm,
you can have some more compassion for yourself and train, as you said, with as something that you get to do, something that you
yeah.
are gifting yourself in terms of time and support and moving your body, well, how
Mm,
can you make it extra nourishing, extra, enjoyable? Of course, I know it's a lot of pain that comes on a
yeah,
3 hour
yeah.
bike ride. So I'm not suggesting, you're kind of skipping home. You're kind of, oh, you're done
Well,
by
it's
the time you
like
get to the end
things
of it.
like eating, and what you eat on the bike. There's things like that, or where you go, like the route that you take. There's so many things that you can focus on that are good about it, aren't there? But yeah, like you
Mm.
say, you're not. Sometimes you're going to be like, "Why am I doing this? It's horrendous." But that's kind of part of the reason that you do it, because you. So yeah,
Yeah,
it's
well,
an
you're somebody
interesting
who's,
space.
yeah, but you're interested in pushing your body and seeing how far it can go.
Mm,
You want to see what your body's capable of. And that's an awesome thing to do. But how
mm,
do you use that space you've created and really make the most of it? My view is, if you're going to do something, squeeze all the benefit out of it. So
yeah.
if you can process some emotions while you're running and feel a lot cleaner, emotionally when you come back in, if you can notice that you're feeling guilty and, oh, okay, well, yeah, my hip's a bit sore. I wonder what emotion is stored in my hips, or all of
Mm,
these things can just be a really different way. Just to me, it's that extra little 2 or 3%, something you're doing anyway, you've gone to all the
Yeah.
physical effort from it. Can you squeeze out 2% more to nurture yourself, to release something else? And that extra little 2% is not extra effort, but the benefits you can get from that are huge.
Yeah, they are huge. I think that's really great advice. I love that. So thank you for that. Really, I like that. I think a lot of people can get, can take that and run with it, because it's like you just a little bit of extra effort makes a big
Mm.
difference, and that is relevant to all sorts of areas in your life. So yeah, that's perfect. So where can people find out about you and your courses and what you do? And we'll put those links in the show notes, but if you just want to let people know.
Yeah, well, I have a podcast as well, which is called Balance and Beyond, which you can find on Spotify and iTunes and all the places. So they can come and watch me there. We talk about not just balance as a word, but what happens beyond that. How do we avoid burnout? And also balanceinstitute.com is my website. They can find out details on my programs. I've usually got free things running once a month, workshops and challenges and seminars. So come on down.
Nice. Thank you very much. Well, thanks for your time. It's been great chatting with you. And yeah, take care. Have a lovely day.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening today. Have a great day. Take care. Bye for now.